Hi, classroom. This is Dr. Nat here in the reading room, reading The Mostly True Adventures of Homer P. Figg. I got to put a bookmark in here, which I actually have in my purse now. So we did 7, 8, and 9. So now we're on 10. I just got to make sure. No. Did somebody say that? Chapter 9. Chapter 9. Quaker Talk. Quaker Talk. The man who looks like God himself is Jebediah Brewster, owner of the house. Let's keep it right here, like this. There we go. He's got a long, flowing white beard, piercing blue eyes, and a booming voice that rattles the china when he bellows, "Hello!" A voice that freezes my brain and makes it hard to answer simple questions like, "What be thy name, son?" and "Where be thy home?" Quaker Talk. The young scalawag calls himself Homer and says he's from a place called Smelt, says Mrs. Bean, weighing in. The only truthful part of him is the part that he's hungry. Smelt, hey? Very interesting. Mr. Brewster responds in his kindly way. Let me make sure I'm all on. There we go. All God's children are from somewhere. The precise location matters not. Thee be welcome in this house, Homer, whoever thee be, and whatever has brought thee here. Mr. Brewster sits down at the table, adjusts his black sleeves, and announces that he will have a glass of cold water, if Mrs. Bean will be so kind to oblige. He thanks her, takes the glass in both hands, and drinks it in 3 long gulps. His big throat moves under his beard, and you can hear the water going down like it was leaking out of an old hand pump. The finest spring water, he announces, dabbling delicately at his beard with a linen napkin. That's what drew me to this particular location. Clear, cold spring water, steeped in the best minerals. It keeps the guts healthy and purifies the blood. I intended to bottle it as an elixir and sell it by the drop, but in digging out the spring we encountered gemstones, and that became my business. Just one of the Lord's many surprises. Does thee know much about gemstones, Homer? Mr. Brewster asked, sweet as can be. Something in me wants to say my third cousin Curtis McTavish had been trading gems for his whole life and recently come into possession of the world's largest ruby that he got off the widow of Blackbeard the pirate. But that the ruby is cursed. Ever since he got the ruby, poor McTavish lives in fear. He's barricaded himself inside his old dungeon and believes that the ruby speaks to him and the ghostly voices of all it has cursed. Of course, I don't have a cousin named Curtis McTavish, or any cousin I'm aware of, and I clamp my jaw shut until the urge passes. He's gone quiet, Mrs. Bean observes suspiciously. Maybe it was starving made him talk so. Mr. Brewster takes a deep breath and nods to himself as if satisfied. Homer Figg, he announces, thee may be an innocent stranger or thee may be a spy sent by those who oppose us, but one thing is clear to me. Hold on. I have a tickle in my throat. All this stuff is blowing all over the place around here. But one thing is clear to me. God has a hand in this, and he would not have us turn away a hungry child. Mrs. Bean smiles at me and shrugs. I get the idea that nothing Mr. Brewster does surprises her. Come along, son, he says, standing up, and thee will be shown the secret of Brewster mines. The boy needs a bath, Mrs. Bean points out. I doubt he's had a bath this year, and maybe last year, too. After he surveys the mine, says Mrs. Brewster, clamping his hand on my shoulder. After he's seen our amazing mine, thee can scrub him until he bleeds. I'm hoping that's just more Quaker talk, but Mrs. Bean has a soapy kind of gleam in her eye. Before I have time to make plans for escape, Mr. Brewster is marching me out the door and into the long grass. We're going uphill away from the big house, away from the warm kitchen, and the sky is so thin and cool and blue, it makes me feel a little out of breath somehow. Pretty soon we come to a path worn into ruts by wagon wheels, and then to a set of rusty iron rails hammered into the hillside. We follow the rails. From around the bend comes the gentle murmur of flowing water, but sound must be tricky in these hills because I never do see the water. All the while, Mr. Brewster's big voice never stops booming, and it comes to me that he couldn't keep a secret even if it killed him, because secrets are related to lies, and I doubt Mr. Brewster ever lied in his whole life. Which reminds me of my brother Harold, who is probably halfway to the war by now, and worrying about that makes it hard to concentrate on all the things Mr. Brewster is saying about gemstones and mines, and why God has put us on the earth, and how he tests us. So I searched for healing water and instead found the rainbow, he's saying. Not a pot of gold exactly, but a vast deposit of tourmaline, which comes in all colors of the rainbow. I like tourmaline a lot. Tourmaline sounds like a pirate name to me. Must be I got pirates on the brain for some reason, but Mr. Brewster explains that tourmaline is a gemstone used in costume jewelry. When polished, it shines like diamonds or rubies or emeralds, depending on how it's cut. Tourmaline brought me great wealth, he says. It did not bring me wisdom or show me the path. It was God who provided wisdom, and Frederick Douglass who showed me the path. Before he can explain, we come upon the mine itself. I've been expecting a proper tunnel cut into the side of the mountain, like I've seen in storybooks, but Mr. Brewster's mine is more like a big pit in the ground. We're looking down on some rusty tin roofs and a bunch of rickety-looking shacks where the miners work, prying hunks of rock from the ground and cutting out the raw gemstone. Except there are no miners working here. There's no one at all. Mr. Brewster guides me down a narrow little pathway into the empty pit. This is the secret of Brewster Mines, he announces quite happily. We ceased production 2 years ago when the war started. But why is that a secret, I asked. Because the mine remains active, he says mysteriously. It is convenient if the world assumes that the activity is related to mining. Folks think we provide lead and copper to the Union Army. That is not true, and I pray for forgiveness for letting it stand without correction, because my untruthfulness is in the service of a greater good. For once in my life, I keep my mouth shut and wait for him to tell me whatever it is he wants to say. I assume he's going to confess there are fugitive slaves hid in the mine somewhere, like Smelt said. But I'm not supposed to know that, so I got to be ready to act surprised when it comes out. Only it don't come out, not exactly. Mr. Brewster drapes his long arm over my shoulders and holds on like he expects me to bolt any second. He lowers his big voice to a ragged whisper. Ebenezer Smelt is well known in these parts, he confides. Mr. Smelt is often found in the company of William Mullins, better known as Stink. I mentioned this because thee told Mrs. Bean thee hailed from a place called Smelt. To my knowledge, no such place exists, so I must assume thee are in league with the murderous Mr. Smelt and his evil associate. I started out keeping my mouth shut on purpose, but Jebediah Brewster has knocked the words right out of me. Chapter number 10. When the river cries like a baby. Harold read me a story once about a man who could see into your mind. Think of a number and he'd pull it out of the deck of cards. Man could tell what you were thinking before you thought it. He knew your Aunt Mildred's birthday and how many horses your brother owned, and if you preferred rhubarb to apple pie. At the end, he saw things that got him tarred and feathered and run out of town on a rail, and that was the best part of the story. I'm wondering if Jebediah Brewster has the same power to read minds. Doesn't seem possible he'd figured everything out because of one measly word. Turns out it wasn't only the word smelt. It was seeing the man himself. Mr. Smelt has been following us, Brewster explained softly. His hard blue eyes lifted to the hills around us. Thinks he's been clever, but the good Lord gave me the eyes of an eagle. That isn't a dirty old weasel. That's Ebenezer Smelt, scuttling among the rocks. He's the color of dirt, but I see him, indeed I do. He made me do it, I managed to say, made me come here on a rotten lie. Mr. Brewster and Mrs. Bean have been so good and decent it makes me want to cry, having to admit that I've been sent to betray them. Maybe he did and maybe he didn't, Mr. Brewster said, not unkindly. Makes no difference. Our strategy remains the same. Let them watch us, Smelt and his Confederates. See what it gets them, doing the devil's work. They got a darky man. I tell him eager to make up for all my falsehoods. I think they mean to kill him or sell him for a slave. Brewster glances at me sort of sideways, his eyes never straying long from the hills. Darky is not a proper word, he says very stern. If a man has dark skin, say that he is colored or that he is African, or better yet, do not refer to his complexion. Does the Lord care if we be pink or brown? I assure thee, he does not. They put a sack on his head, I tell him, the colored man. That would be Mr. Samuel Reed, the conductor, says Brewster, squinting into the distance. He has been leading a group of slaves to freedom and was abducted 2 days ago. We've been on the lookout ever since. I figure by conductor he means the colored man works on a train collecting tickets, but Mr. Brewster is talking about the Underground Railroad, which is a different thing. He explains there aren't any actual trains on the Underground Railroad and no rails to speak of, but they do have conductors who guide fugitive slaves from station to station. Each station being a house or a hiding place. Could be a root cellar or a shed or a mine, anywhere they can hide fugitives on their way north to Canada where slavery has been outlawed. Thousands have come this way, he explains. They are given safety at this station and many others like it. Men like Samuel Reed risk their own freedom so that others may be free. And men like Mullins and Smelt are always waiting in the shadows, eager to betray them for a few pieces of silver. The evil that men do for money continues to astound me. And thee kin to such men, Homer Figg? Speak the truth, for I shall know if thee lie. I decided that lying to Jebediah Brewster is like lying to God. You can't fool either one. So I tell him about coming upon Stink and Smelt in the woods, how they stole Bob the horse and took me prisoner, and how Smelt will be waiting for me when night comes, and that he will want to know where the fugitives have been hid. Mr. Brewster nods. It's as I expected. It's as I suspected. Come along, Homer, back to the house, as if we are not aware that Mr. Smelt is watching us. This evening after supper, thee wilt report to him as instructed. What should I tell him? I asked Mr. Brewster. Mr. Brewster's smile is hard and cold as a diamond gemstone. Tell him the truth, he says. The truth shall set thee free. Night never took so long to come. It's like someone nailed the sun in the sky just to torment me. Because the last thing in the world I want to do is come face to face with Ebenezer Smelt. He might try to snatch me away, and even though Mr. Brewster says to tell him the truth, I'm afraid of what he'll do with the truth. Because the real truth is, I don't know what's going to happen when night finally gets here. Mr. Brewster is as calm as some old white mountain waiting for the wind to wear it down. There's no rush about him. He waits like waiting is all he ever wanted to do. I was raised among the Society of Friends, the people thee call Quakers, he says, staring at me like a great bearded barn owl. We're on the side porch facing the rolling hills to the west, and every shadow looks like someone coming to steal me away. In the big warm kitchen, Mrs. Bean is cooking supper. The smell of beef and potatoes wafting out to the porches makes my throat feel thick, like it's hard to swallow, like I still have a few fat lies stuck in my throat. The Friends believe no man may be enslaved by another, Mr. Brewster continues very stern. We also believe no man has the right to kill another, even in war, no matter how just the war. Forbidden from the battlefield, I must find another path towards righteousness. Such a place is here, he says, thumping his rocking chair with his fist. Jebediah Brewster stands up tall as the world and takes hold of my hand. Come along, Homer Figg. There's a sight thee must see. He takes me to the basement door. Figure he's going to lock me up like Squint and throw away the key. Except there are no locks on the doors in the Brewster house. Be not afraid, he says. No harm will come to thee. He lights a glowing lantern and throws open the basement door. From below comes the light of other lanterns and a gentle murmur that sounds like a deep river that cries like a baby. That was chapter 9 and 10 of our book for the reading room. The book is The Mostly True Adventures of Homer P. Figg by Rodman Philbrick. And we will be here back on Tuesday for chapter number 11, The Weasel Comes A-Callin'. Okay. All right. Thanks for joining me. I'm Dr. Annette Farovich. You can call me Dr. Annette if you are 10 or under. Thanks for joining me in the reading room. I will see you here on Tuesday. Thanks for being here.